So a few people have asked the question, either in person or on the channel, would Tarka be better if she had a kicker, a kicking strap or a boom vang? Well, I think that is a very interesting question, and in the absence of Tarka, she is still at the boat builders, I thought it might be quite fun to use a boat that does have a kicker, in this case a laser, to try and explore what a kicker actually does and what would the pros and cons be of fitting one to a boat like Tarka. So that's what I'm going to do today. A laser might be a suitable boat because its sail is in some ways quite similar to Tarka's. It's triangular, fairly high aspect, tall and thin. It's made of Dacron, a relatively stretchy sailcloth. It has 3 battens, what relevance that is. And being attached to a laser, it's attached to a much more responsive boat than Tarka, and that means I think that hopefully we should be able to see what some of those pros and cons of having a kicker are much more easily than on Tarka herself. Apart from the fact, of course, that this boat already has a kicker and it is very easy to detach it to find out just what happens when we do. So, as well as the similarities between Tarka-style and a laser sail, there are some differences as well that are worth pointing out. And of course, a laser is not gunter rigged, there's no gaff, just the mast. I think it's called an Una rig to be technically correct. And the mast is a simple pair of aluminium tubes, which in their basic form are straight, but the leading edge of the sail is not straight, it's curved. Let's have a look here. You know, you can see the curve in the sail, and when that goes onto a straight mast, that curve in the luff of the sail translates into depth in the front of the sail, and that is one of the reasons why a kicker is very important to a laser. Because if you want to get rid of that depth in the sail, you have to be able to bend the mast so that it more closely matches the shape of the luff of the sail. And possibly not quite so relevant on Tarka, which has a very straight luff. So I'll have a look at that more closely once the sail is rigged. So now that the boat's rigged, we have a very quick look at what the kicker actually does before taking it out on the water. So, very basically, of course, it just pulls down on the boom. It controls the angle of the boom, stops it from raising up too high, and also, as it pulls on, pulling down the boom adds tension to the leech of the sail. But it doesn't pull directly down, as it's pulling in this 45-degree angle rather than directly down the boom. It also pulls the boom that way as well as that way, which is relevant because it effectively bends the mast kind of like a bow and arrow, I suppose, pushing the boom forwards here while at the same time pushing backwards or pulling backwards on the mast down here is another way of adding bend into the lower part of the mast. So that'll do for now. We shall continue on the water. So here we go. I'll start by sailing upwind. And what's happening with not a lot of kicker on is that because it's quite breezy, I see I'm spilling wind out of the front third of the sail there, which means that only the back 2/3 of the sail is working. Means the centre of effort of the sail is towards the back, pushing the stern of the boat downwind, far of the boat upwind, and that's giving me weather helm. so it's not very efficient. So I need to use the sail controls, kicker and Cunningham, to try and get rid of that bagginess at the front of the sail. Let's do the kicker first. There it goes. Boom's coming down, boom's bending, mast is bending back, and the sail is much flatter. But the Cunningham would help too, and then it will pull down on the luff of the sail, bending the mast a little bit more, and also in a Dacron sail, it's going to pull a little bit of bagginess out, stretch the sail flat. So here comes the Cunningham. Now we are about to sail through a big gust. Here it comes. And because the sail is now much flatter, much more of the sail is working than before. There's still a little bit of weather helm, but there's not so much. Boat feels reasonably well balanced going through these gusts.
I feel I could explain that better. I hope you won't mind if, to do that, I start by very quickly going right back to the basics of how a sail works. If a sail is left to its own devices, of course it just flaps like a flag and generates no useful force to drive the boat forwards. When the sail is sheeted in, it stops flapping and the wind blows it into a nice curved shape. This curved shape then bends the streams of air as they flow past either side of the sail. The sail pushes on the air flowing past its windward side and pulls or sucks on the air flowing past its leeward side, forcing them both to deflect, something like this. Any force the sail applies to the airflow is matched by the airflow with an equal and opposite force on the sail, and it's this force which provides the thrust to propel the boat. That's the theory. I'm sure there are a few more things that make real life a bit more complicated than that, but that explanation is good enough for me. There is an angle to the wind at which the sail works best, generating the maximum possible amount of thrust for a given wind speed. In lighter winds, finding this optimum angle is part of the art of sailing. However, in stronger winds, the sail can easily generate more thrust than you want. You can see how the force in this sail is more sideways than forwards. The centreboard's job is to grip the water and help the boat move forwards rather than sideways, but if the sideways force can't push the boat sideways, it will try instead to blow the boat over. The amount of thrust a boat can cope with is limited by its ability to counter this heeling force. In a laser, as with most racing dinghies, the counter to the heeling force comes largely from the crew's body weight, suspended as far outboard as possible. Sailing upwind on this fairly blustery day, if I were to trim the sail to its optimum angle to the wind, it would generate much more thrust than I would be able to hold down with my body weight, and the boat would be blown over. Therefore, I am having to keep the sail at a finer angle to the wind by a combination of easing the sheet slightly and pinching or luffing or feathering the boat up towards the wind, reducing the amount that the sail deflects the wind and therefore reducing the thrust it creates. However, there is an unwanted side effect in that at this finer angle, the wind is unable to blow the whole sail into its nice curved shape. The front part of the sail is backwinding, inverting or luffing, in other words, curving the wrong way or sometimes just flapping like a flag again, while the thrust is coming from further back in the sail. This is undesirable for two reasons. One is that the flapping or backwinding part of the sail is causing us drag, slowing the boat down. The second is that as the thrust of the sail is coming from the aft part that isn't flapping, the centre of thrust is also moved aft. The balance of the boat's steering is upset and it wants to turn up into the wind. This has to be countered by the rudder, adding more drag.
As far as the boat upwind, that's giving me weather helm, so it's not very efficient.
When I pour the kicker on, the sail becomes much flatter. A flatter sail cannot deflect the airflow as much as a curved sail, so by flattening the sail, we have reduced the potential of the sail to generate thrust. It's very much like an aircraft retracting its flaps after takeoff. Flaps enable the aircraft's wing to deflect the airflow over the wing through a large angle to create enough force to lift the aircraft at relatively low airspeeds. At higher airspeeds, the same lift can be generated by deflecting the air through a much smaller angle, and you can have a much flatter wing to reduce drag. Pilots would call this reducing the lift coefficient. Sailors tend to call it depowering the sail. What this means is that we can once again sheet the sail to its optimum angle to the wind, where the whole sail is generating thrust and none of it is causing drag. The centre of effort is moved forward again, and steering balance is therefore improved. The Cunningham also works to flatten the sail and depower it further, but at risk of getting sidetracked, I will resist taking a closer look at the Cunningham for now. Let's have one last quick look at the sail as we sail upwind, first with the kicker eased, and secondly after it's been pulled tight. It's not easy to see how much flatter the sail is after the kicker's been pulled on, but hopefully you'll agree that it is much less flappy.
Tack on, right, let's try tack without bashing the GoPro.
Sailing upwind, having the ability to use the kicker in addition to any other sail controls at your disposal to tweak the shape of the sail so that it delivers the right amount of thrust in the most efficient way possible as the boat sails through gusts, lulls, wind shifts, waves or different boat-on-boat tactical situations is part of what makes sail racing such a great sport. But how much does it improve your cruising experience? Later, I'll try to find out by sailing the boat upwind with no kicker at all, but first, let's have a look at what the kicker does when sailing downwind.
What the kicker does downwind. Got to ease off, otherwise you won't be able to bear away. Quite a big gust on. Whee! There we go. Turn you off. Helpful, put you off a little bit. Forward. So, the kicker now is controlling the shape of the sail and ideally giving me a good balance between power, balance and control. So if we let the kicker off too much, see how twisted the sail is, that's spinning power, the boat could be going faster. Put the kicker too hard, that boom is bent, the sail has a nasty crease in it. That sail's too flat, it's giving me weather helm because the leech is so hard. It's in a way reducing power because the sail is so flat, and if we get a bit of a heel, let's have a look, boom catches in the water very easily and that could result in a capsize. Not good, not easy to control, not fast. So we ease it out a bit. More depth goes into the sail. Just using the kicker to control. You can see that really quite extreme depth in the front of the sail there. Not very even curve, so if you want to kick on again a bit, get a much nicer curve across the whole sail. Right, to jibe.
Let's just revisit that quickly as the boat reaches along the lakeshore. Unlike sailing upwind, when you're sailing downwind, the main sheet is unable to pull downwards on the boom in any meaningful way, and so without a kicker, the boom will rise and the sail will twist. A twisted sail deflects less wind and gives you less thrust. Therefore, some kicker is useful to reduce the twist. However, if you pull the kicker too tight, it will start doing the job we were using it for upwind, flattening the sail and reducing again the amount of thrust it is capable of giving. So, in order to achieve maximum thrust, you need to find a happy middle ground where the sail is not too twisted from top to bottom and still nicely curved from front to back, or luff to leech. Too much kicker will also bend the mast, not backwards this time, but sideways, and this, combined with the firm leech that the tight kicker will cause, will make the boat want to turn up into the wind. In other words, the steering will be out of balance, and rudder input will be needed to keep the boat straight. Weather helm, which adds drag, slows the boat down, and makes it harder to control. Downwind, especially on a run, most, occasionally all, of the sail's thrust is in a forwards direction, so the heeling component is massively reduced. Now, even in strong winds, you can set the sail up to give you as much thrust as you like. More thrust, of course, means more speed, which is great for racing, but also good for general controllability of the boat. Sailing directly downwind in 20 knots of breeze, for example, a boat moving at 12 knots will have 8 knots worth of wind pressure on the sail. If you can increase your speed to 13 knots, you will only have 7 knots worth of wind pressure on the sail. The reduced pressure on the sail, combined with increased pressure of the water rushing past, will help to keep the boat on the plane, less likely to dig its bow into the next wave, and make the rudder more responsive. Dinghies are generally easier to sail in strong winds when they're moving fast. The trouble often happens when they slow down. On a beam reach, which is roughly what we're doing here with the wind blowing almost directly over the side of the boat, there is quite a lot of heeling force in the sail. I am having to hike to counter the force, and I am sometimes having to let the sail luff or flap slightly at the front, indicating that the sail is sometimes giving me more thrust than I can counter. To be more efficient, if the wind increases any more, the sail may need depowering. As you'll remember, when sailing downwind, for maximum thrust, the kicker is set somewhere in the middle to give the best compromise between controlling twist in the sail and maintaining a powerful curve from luff to leech. Therefore, in theory, both tightening and releasing the kicker will reduce the sail's potential to produce thrust. Easing the kicker will reduce thrust by allowing the top of the sail to twist open, and it will make the boat easier to control, because when a gust hits, the boom will rise and the sail will twist open even more. There will be an element of automatic gust response. You could say the sail will be gust stable. When the kicker is pulled on tight downwind, you prevent it from being able to twist open in a gust. Instead, the forces in the gust tend to blow the rig into a shape that is even harder to control. The rig is gust unstable. Easing the kicker, therefore, is generally a better way to depower the sail on a reach, although it may allow the mast to straighten too much, making the sail loose and baggy, which could create drag. In fact, on a racing boat, often the best way to initially depower the sail when you have too much thrust on a beam or close reach is to leave the kicker and tighten the Cunningham and outhaul instead.
Right, here we go. I'm going to bravely disconnect the kicking strap. See what happens. Once it's off, no guarantee of getting it back on. There we go. Whoa. So, can't reef the laser, we can reef Tarka. I'm going to leave a little bit of Cunningham on, just to simulate reefing Tarka, because this sail is quite overpowered as it is at the moment. So, let's sail upwind. So I could go block to block and bend the mast a little bit, but it wouldn't be as good as having the kicker on. But the boat is sailing upwind quite happily, waiting for a gust. The load on the main sheet is much higher, because I'm not only taking the lateral load from the wind, but also a lot of the vertical load coming largely from the bent mast. So I'm really feeling a lot more pull on my main sheet arm as I'm adjusting the sail. As I ease the sail, in the gusts. You see the top of it really twisting off, blading open the mast, straightening. Fullness coming back into the sail, which you don't really want. The sail is definitely very inefficient. But the boat is sailing, the load on the tiller is quite low. There's not a huge amount of weather helm. Apart from a very heavy load on the main sheet, the boat is not that unpleasant to sail upwind, and it's sailing reasonably fast. Not as fast as it would be if the kicker was on, but we're probably only talking about a 10% reduction. Massive if you're racing, not quite so important if you're cruising. Tacking's going to be easier as well with the boom much higher.
There was a bit of a contradiction there. Wasn't I talking earlier about how I had more weather helm before I flattened the sail by putting the kicker on? Yes, but what is making the difference here is the Cunningham. I've pulled the Cunningham on this time because I think it will make for a fairer experiment. If Tarka was as overpowered as this laser sail is in these conditions, we'd have taken in a reef. Also, Tarka's sail is cut for a straight mast. In other words, Tarka's sail will be as flat with a straight mast as a laser sail is with a bent mast. Simply, pulling the Cunningham on is making the laser sail more similar to Tarka's, and therefore giving us a better indication of how useful, or not, a kicker would be to Tarka.
Right, second we'll see what happens when we turn downwind. And make sure the outhaul's on fairly tight, because with the kicker off, that is the main thing that holds the boom into the mast. It's just on a loose gooseneck, of course, on a laser. With the kicker off, there's not a risk of the boom falling off the gooseneck, so we'll keep the outhaul tight to try and stop that from happening. Right, here we go. Boom's going right up in the air. Really doesn't look good, does it? Does feel a bit wobbly. Of course, the laser is that famous death roll is always a risk downwind, especially with no kicker, because the top of the sail twists off so much it drives the boat over that way, so the sail hits the water mast first and can go upside down very quickly. So to counter that, I'm keeping the boom sheeted in about 45 degrees. It still does feel very wobbly, and definitely not as fast. It's not an efficient sail shape. Whoops! Let's see what happens on a reach. We'll turn it up. Here we go, nice gust. The sail's blading off lots. There's still enough power in it to get the boat planing quite happily. Again, a bit like upwind, the helm feels very light, with the sail twisting off that much, and it is keeping the centre of effort of the sail quite low down and forward. So weather helm is certainly not a problem. The boat feels nicely balanced, just clearly not as powerful as it would be with the kicker. But in terms of speed, again, we're just talking fractions. So what about a gybe? try and get a gust to make it a bit more realistic. There's no need to pull the boom in as much as I would have done. Sorry, there's no need to let the boom out as much as I would have done with the kicker on, because there's so much less power in the sail. So the boom kind of stayed roughly where it is, about 45 degrees out. Let's go through the jibe, here we go. It wasn't a very tidy jibe, but it was very forgiving. I think with the kicker on, the boat might have capsized in that jibe. That's a big old gust as well.
Let's have a quick look at jibing. With the kicker on again, this is how I'm used to jibing dinghies. Once again, speed is the key to making the boat handling easier. I try to build speed before the jibe and take as much speed through the turn as I can, ideally using a bit of windward heel to help the boat turn quickly without using too much rudder, which would act as a brake. In a laser, with the kicker set to give me maximum downwind thrust, the need for speed requires you to initiate the jibe with the sail eased out quite a long way, to, I would guess, about 60 degrees, and then steer through quite a large angle to complete the jibe. When the sail comes across, it has quite a long way to travel, about 120 degrees from one side to the other, and it comes across fast, and immediately powers up and sends the boat flying along again on a broad reach. It makes for a fast, racy jibe, and it is safe enough in a small boat with a light rig, as long as you keep that speed on. I tried this method once with Tarka, and it did not go well. She couldn't carry enough speed through the turn, and when the boom did come across with no kicker to hold it down, it kicked up violently and actually pulled the gooseneck right up and out of the top end of its track on the mast. I have never attempted that method in anything more than a light breeze again. Since then, I have been very cautious jibing Tarka, often going the long way round and tacking when it's been breezy, and when we do jibe, I've been sheeting the mainsail in quite hard so that the main sheet can stop the boom from flicking up, and the boom only has a short way to travel from side to side, so it can't build too much momentum. My experience with racing dinghies, though, has made me cautious of this method in stronger winds. You pull the main sheet in on the run at your peril. All sorts of bad things can happen. The boat will slow down, so the rudder will lose much of its effectiveness. The sail might jibe before you expect it, and if you're not very careful and sail slightly too far from a dead run, the sail will power up very quickly and spin you towards the wind, and you'll be blown over before you know it. However, Tarka, due to her fairly low power-to-weight ratio, has so far proved to be quite docile with this technique. For my second downwind run without the kicker, I'm first going to find out what happens if I try to run dead downwind, and then have a look at trying Tarka's more gentle jibing technique.
Right. Whoa! Let the sheet out a little bit too much. That is pretty much dead downwind, I think. There's a very twisted sail. And I think we're almost by the lee. You can see the telltales there reversing. We're certainly by the lee in the bottom third of the sail. So I think the whole boat, looking at the waves as well, pretty much dead downwind, if not beyond it. And the boat is fairly comfortable now. Try changing the angle slightly. It's a bit of a gust coming. It's going to head up again just to get into this gust. Turn downwind again before we run out of the lake. Oh, hey! There is a gust there. There we go. Right, now the jibe I was talking about was pulling the main sheet all the way in, so it hardly crosses the boat at all. That's really difficult in a laser normally because the sail's so powered up. But if you pull the mainsail in this much,
What happened there was an unintended illustration of one of the pitfalls of sailing dead downwind with the mainsail pulled in. That was an accidental jibe. My initial thought was to tack round and start the sequence again, keeping that bit for the outtakes, but as it illustrates a point, it's probably better left in.
The jibe I was talking about earlier is if you pull the main sheet in tight, so it's got hardly any travel across the boat. The boat slows right down is the problem, so the sail is quite loaded, and in a laser, certainly with the kicker on, the risk is that when the sail powers up on the other side, it broaches and spins you up and you get a capsize to leeward. But without a kicker, it might just be forgiving enough. Let's see. I had to sheet out pretty quick on the other side, but it was a very gentle jibe, despite the fact it was using a big gust. We did it back again the other way, sheeting in quite hard. The boat is slowing down, there's not a lot of power in the sail, wind is still fairly strong. Here comes the jibe. Having to sheet out fairly hard to control the boat, but Tarka, not being as responsive as a laser, doesn't have that problem. Do a more conventional jibe to finish. Oh, it doesn't like that, the way it flops across, the way the sail flops across with a big lift on the boom. I think that does put quite a lot of load on the gooseneck fittings and doesn't seem healthy. It's alright in this laser, but Tarka with the heavier spars and possibly not quite so robust fittings, not such a good idea. Right.
Having been pleasantly surprised by how easy it was on that run to perform Tarka-style jibes with the main sheet pulled in quite hard, I thought I should probably try it with the kicker on to see if it really was that much more difficult. So for the next run downwind, I reattached the kicker and set it to its normal maximum thrust downwind position.
So if I were to try to pull the main sheet in going downwind like this, it would be, there's the approach, I can't really control it, heading up to wind, just about controlled it. Oh, it feels horrible though. Whoa! The other thing is the boom does come across, it's going to hit me in the face, or possibly in the GoPro, which is more costly. Yeah, so I don't fancy that. I think I'm going to abort that experiment.
So that was a very short-lived experiment, largely because I realised that if the same thing happened as last time and there was an accidental jibe, I would have very little warning, and this time the boom would not politely lift itself over my head as it came across. There are some risks I'm not prepared to take, even for YouTube. However, I had experienced enough to know that in this configuration, sailing on close to a dead run with the main sheet pulled in and the kicker on, the boat was almost unsailable. When a gust hit, instead of the leech twisting to release thrust, the wind would blow onto the firm leech, exposing more sail to the wind and increasing thrust, making the whole rig and therefore the boat very twitchy and unstable. Once I'd reverted to sailing with the sail eased, boat speed took the pressure off the rig again and everything became much more manageable. So, is that enough experimenting to be able to draw some conclusions about kicking straps for Tarka and cruising boats more generally? Well, it's no surprise to say that the laser felt significantly faster both upwind and downwind when the kicker was in use. And speed certainly is a useful quality for a cruising boat, especially when there's a current against you. Having said that, most of the ways in which the kicker made the laser faster upwind by allowing the sail to deliver the right amount of thrust in the most efficient possible way just wouldn't be achievable with Tarka, even if she did have a kicker. For that, you need a mast that is happy to bend, and a kicker that is powerful enough to bend it, and I just don't think that works with wooden masts. I stand to be corrected, but I don't think I've ever seen a powerful kicker attached to a wooden mast, and there must be a good reason for that. Even though the laser wasn't quite as speedy upwind without the kicker, when the Cunningham was applied to simulate a reefed sail, it was perfectly pleasant to sail upwind, and I would say fast enough for cruising purposes. So what about downwind? Well, although again speed was reduced, the laser was in most ways easier and more forgiving to sail downwind without the kicker. There was more tendency to roll to windward, dead downwind, but this was fairly easily tamed by sheeting the boom in to around 45 degrees. With Tarka, I would prioritise having an easy, forgiving rig over having a fast one, and in spring this year I had a moment in Tarka which illustrated how useful it can be to have a forgiving rig. In very strong winds, the boat will be much easier and gentler to sail with the kicker ease than pull tight, both upwind and downwind. I know this from 2 occasions I can remember when I've been out racing and the wind has strengthened to a near gale force of over 30 knots. Once was club racing at Beer on the East Devon coast, and the other was the Laser International Qualifier at Tees and Hartlepool in 2005, which I don't think anyone who was there will ever forget. On both occasions, the only way to make the boat saleable to get back to shore was to pull the Cunningham and outhaul on hard and ease the kicker. One useful way to think about the kicker is to say that pulling it on is like putting a car into a higher gear. If the going is smooth and you're moving fast, you can use a higher gear to go even faster. If you hit a rough patch or have to slow down for any reason, you might need to select a lower gear again. So, would I say that kicking straps are never a good thing on a cruising dinghy? Not at all. For a start, many cruising dinghies do have the kind of rig that can benefit from a powerful kicker upwind for all the reasons we've explored in this video. Secondly, it might all depend on how you want your boat to feel. Both upwind and downwind having the kicker on made the Laser feel much tauter and more responsive. To use another car analogy, it was much more like driving a sports car. Twitchy, eager, highly strung, you might say, like a playful puppy, more demanding but potentially more rewarding. Great for the racetrack and potentially fun for cruising as well. But I have to admit that a few years ago, before kids, when Sarah's car was a Mazda MX-5, although I did quite enjoy driving it, it was often a bit of a relief to get back into my comfortable, soft and reassuringly gentle Skoda Fabia. Taking the kicker off the Laser gave it that soft, gentle and forgiving estate car feel, and perhaps that is the kind of feel you might choose to have from your cruising dinghy. Finally, having no kicker does create more space in the boat's cockpit, and for Tarka, crucially, it allows room for her canopy to be raised while sailing. So, for those reasons, I have no intention of fitting a kicking strap to Tarka anytime soon.
That's a solid bit of rain.
Oh dear! Quick, get under the cover! I didn't feel this rain.